In today's video, we're going to talk about modes or types of transportation, right? Focusing on transportation in Brazil, among them road, rail, air, and water transportation. All of this in an illustrated and objective way, just the way I know you like it. So let's get into the video. Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Paulo, your geography teacher. As always, it's an honor to have you here with me on Geo Ilustrada. Our topic today is modes of transportation. And in this video, I'm going to make a mind map using the font that my students usually use at school. I hope you enjoy it. And you, student, who's watching me, do you also use that font? Leave a comment so I know, okay? Well, let's start by talking about what modes of transportation are. After all, what are they? Well, they are nothing more than modes or types of transportation used to move people or cargo, that is, goods. And it's very important for you to know that all modes will have advantages and disadvantages, right? And that the predominant mode in each country will vary according to the particular characteristics of each country. Ideally, there should be integration, right, between the modes. Well, now that you already understand what transportation modes are, let's start talking about each of them. Starting here with air transport, and here you'll notice how the names themselves already suggest the characteristics of each mode. Here, for example, air transport. So these are the means of transport that move through the airspace, like airplanes, for example, and helicopters. In the case of this mode, the focus tends to be on transporting people and also high-value goods. And without a doubt, one of its main advantages is speed. It's very fast transportation, which makes it ideal for long distances, especially internationally, right? From one country to another. However, this mode also has some disadvantages. For example, its high cost, both in the construction of airports and also in the construction of the aircraft themselves, which are extremely expensive. There's also the price of tickets, right? Which are not affordable anyway. In addition, air transport also has low capacity. The cargo capacity, especially if we compare it with other modes. Besides that, a big disadvantage is that they are very polluting, right? They use fossil fuels, which contributes to atmospheric pollution. Well, let's talk now about waterway transport. So hydro, water, right? Transport that uses waterways, whether on rivers, lakes, or oceans. And this type of transport has many advantages. For example, its large cargo capacity, right? It transports a lot of cargo at the same time. Because of that, it also has low shipping costs, right? Because of its high cargo capacity. And another big advantage of this mode is the environmental aspect. It's not very polluting, right? Especially when compared to the others. So this mode is all good, right, Professor? No, not necessarily. It also has its disadvantages. For example, it's a slow form of transport. It's not as fast as an airplane, for example. And it's also very dependent on natural conditions, the natural characteristics of each country, like the characteristics of waterways and terrain. For example, if the country doesn't have favorable waterways, right? Large rivers, large volumes of water, or even if the terrain is irregular, it makes it difficult for vessels to travel. Even though there are locks, right? Those are like elevators for vessels. You must have seen them, right? That's it. They don't solve all the country's terrain problems by themselves. Anyway, but still, this is a very efficient mode. Even here in the case of Brazil, we have great potential to use this mode more, right? But still, it's not used that much, right? It's underused in our country. Well, now let's talk about the two main ones, right? Which are road and rail transport. Let's start then by talking about rail transport. And here, as the name itself suggests, this mode uses railways. In other words, it's trains, subways, locomotives, and so on. And this mode in general has many advantages. For example, its high capacity to transport large volumes, whether it's cargo or people. So this alone already makes the freight cost, right? And also the ticket price is lower than those of other modes. So one of its main features is, without a doubt, economical transportation. Besides that, it's also not very polluting, especially when compared to road transportation, which we will see next. Even though it also uses fossil fuels like diesel oil, it also uses clean energy sources, right? Like electricity and also biodiesel. So is this the ideal mode of transportation, Professor? Doesn't it have any disadvantages? I wish. No, it has disadvantages too. For example, the limited railway network, which makes it, for example, unfeasible for short distances. Besides that, another limiting factor for this mode is the terrain, right? Since it's quite complex, the construction of railways in very uneven terrains. This makes its implementation expensive as well as time-consuming. Another negative factor of this mode is its lack of flexibility, right? Because it follows the tracks, so it doesn't have the flexibility that, for example, trucks or buses have. That's why it's important to integrate rail transport with road transport, which we will see now. Road transport. And it also has many advantages, such as, for example, ease of access and mobility. So, unlike rail transport, road transport is very agile, right? It has this convenience, for example, of door-to-door delivery. All those useless things you buy on Shopee. It only gets to your house because of this mobility. So this mode has great reach. In other words, it can reach practically anywhere, which is a big advantage for it. However, it also has many disadvantages. For example, its high maintenance cost, right? It's common for us to see roads and highways under constant maintenance, right? Because it wears out very easily. Besides that, this mode is also very polluting, right? It causes a lot of damage to the environment, mainly because of the high emission of greenhouse gases. That's because the fuels used are mostly derived from petroleum, right? So they're very polluting. And another very important thing you need to know is that this is the most widely used mode of transport in Brazil. That has historical roots, right? One of the reasons is the JK government. Have you studied the JK government? Juscelino Kubitschek? Back in the 50s and 60s, there was a big investment here in Brazil in highways, right? That was largely due to the incentives that were given, the car manufacturers that came to produce here in Brazil. So there was this big investment within the state in highways. Besides that, what was also aimed for during that period was national integration, right? Which was mainly achieved through a network of roads. I'll talk a bit more about that in this video that's appearing on your screen about the industrialization of Brazil. Watch it too, okay? I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like. Don't forget to share. That really helps a lot. Thanks. See you next time. Bye-bye.